Hi everyone, this is Nia and I'll be painting loose wildflowers. These are fairly easy to paint, it's made of simple shapes and I'll be dividing this tutorial into two sections where I'll be showing you the shapes and colors I used along with a smaller version of the flowers, then I'll be combining them all together in a simple composition at the end. Like usual, let me start by drawing out the individual flowers. For this one, I just made long shapes combined together to create the petals. For this, it doesn't really matter how many lines are in each flower. Instead, I like to play around with the different amounts of petals as variation. Continuing on with the stems, which I like to draw crookedly so it doesn't look too stiff and straight. Instead, it looks nice and organic. I like to start with one main stem, then branch it out to the other flowers. But to fill in the space, you can also add ovals for flower buds, and I also made simple round leaf shapes to finish this one off. I'll be using my Pentel set for this one, and for the colors, I'll be using a mix of vermilion, Naples yellow, and also orange. And let me just show you how I'm going to mix the colors. This is around the tone that I like, but you can also adjust the ratio to your liking as well. I'm going to paint the flowers by just creating semi-thick lines fairly close together to form a cluster of petals to create one single flower. Then for the leaves, I'll be using the colors Viridian and Yellow Ochre. Sorry, I know I wrote the wrong thing. I promise I fixed it at the end. But anyway, I'm just mixing those two colors to create a muted mid-tone green, and I'm continuing to paint the flower by first creating a triangular shape below the flower. Then I added the stem, flower buds, and also the leaves. Let's move on to the second flower. I'm going to do the same thing but with thinner lines this time to form delicate light petals. You can also use a smaller brush like a size 0 for this if you would like to, and it also depends on the size you're going to paint this at. As for the stem and the structure of the flower, I'm just going to give it the same character as the previous one, so it becomes a set. As for the leaves, I'm going to add more branching out for this one, and I also made it a bit smaller. For the color of this flower, I'm going to use a mixture of yellow and orange. The orange is just there to make the yellow a little bit warmer and a bit more visible. I'm painting this using the very tip of my brush since I'm just using one size, but as I mentioned, you can also use a smaller brush to make it a bit easier. And I'm just going to paint one large flower and a smaller one on the side. For the leaves, I used light green, Viridian, and also a mixture of the yellow-orange from the flower to mute the color because I feel like Pentel set sometimes is a little bit too vibrant for my liking, so I like to mute the color slightly to lower the saturation. I'm just painting the leaves the same way as I did before, but I made the leaves smaller and I also added more leaves around the flowers this time. Moving on to the third flower now. This one is so simple. I'm just going to create dots or ovals or markings, whatever you want to call it. I'm making little clusters to slightly separate them, and so I can then connect them together with delicate branching stems. I would recommend for you to use a smaller brush for this one if you're a beginner because it's a bit easier to control the water flow with a smaller brush when painting small shapes and thin lines. The color that I'm going to use for this flower is a mixture of ultramarine blue and sky blue, and I'm just going to mix them together to find the tone that I like. And remember that you can always switch up the ratio or even mix and match the colors that I've shown you here with different flowers if you would like to. Notice the small amount of paint that I took with the tip of my brush. I do this so I don't overload my brush because the paint will become uncontrollable and create huge puddles, especially when I'm painting something so small. So I want to make sure that the brush is just dampened from the paint. For the color of the stem and younger buds, I'm going to use a mix of Viridian and brown. And again, I want to make sure that my brush is just damp from the paint. And if it's overloaded, you can just dab the excess paint on tissue before painting. For the fourth flower, I'm just going to make tiny dots in oval clusters, and these are going to represent tiny flowers with delicate rounded stems bunched together from the main stem. You can see that just by slightly varying the type of markings and how the flowers cluster together, you can create many types of flowers. As for the leaves, I'm going to add longer leaves for this one, so it's a bit different from the previous flowers that we've painted so far. I'm just painting smaller versions of the flowers here, so it's a bit clearer for you to see how I've painted it. But as practice, you can also do a few more of these before putting them together in the final composition, just so you can be a bit more comfortable with it, and you can also take it as warm-up before the painting. For the colors, I'm going to use red and Naples yellow to create a warm pink color, and as for the leaves, I'm just going to use the same mixture as the second flower, which is a mixture of light green, Viridian, and yellow-orange. Here's what the red and Naples yellow look like as I mix it. I don't know if you can see it on camera or not, but the red on the Pentel is closer to magenta or pinkish red compared to the vermilion, which is more of an orangey red, so the tone of pink here is slightly different. I'm just painting dots with the tip of my brush to start here, but again, for this you can also use a smaller brush if it's easier for you, but I'm just going to show you that it's still doable with this brush even if you don't have access to smaller ones. Or again, you can also increase the size of the painting to adjust to your brush size as well. For the flowers, I also like to add hints of green for the flowers to show that some flowers are at different stages of growth. It also makes it a little bit easier to adjust the clusters this way. For the green of the stem, though I'm using the same mixture, you can also change up the ratio slightly to create a different tone of green, like by adding more Viridian to add more of a darker tone, or to use yellow or orange to make it warmer if you would like the color to be slightly varied. Moving on to the last flower now. This one is mostly a 3-petaled flower, and I'm just going to combine the petals together, but you can vary the amount from 1 to 3 petals, and also changing up the size for a bit of variation. For this one, I don't want the flowers to be as bushy as the previous flowers that I've drawn, so I place the flowers closer together. Then to finish it off, I just add the small leaves again, but a bit more pointy this time, so it's a little bit different from the first couple of flowers. For the color of the flower, I'm going to use a mixture of purple and Naples yellow, and as for the leaves, since I already have a lot of green mixtures on my palette, I'm just going to take what I already have. It's only a matter of taking either the lighter greens or the darker ones. I'm not really going to come up with different temperatures or different tones of greens because I want this to look good together as a set. So for this, I'm just going to paint it like how I've drawn them, and for the example, I'm going to create a 3-petaled one, 2-petaled flower, and also a single one, which can be more of like a flower bud. For this, I picked a darker green for the stems, and I continue to paint the flowers by painting a triangular shape to continue the flow from the flower to the stem and finish everything off with the leaves. As extra fillers, I'm also going to add some leaves, so I'm going to paint 2 types, and the first one is just the long leaves because I really like the soft movement it has, and it's basically the same as the leaves on the 4th flower. You can also take this as an opportunity to practice painting them. I know someone in the comment section asked me how I paint longer leaves, and it's basically the same as how I've painted the smaller ones. I always like to start by using the tip of my brush. Then I just drag my brush a bit longer and also wiggle it at the same time to give it a little bit of movement for these particular leaves. But you can also just drag it on a straight line if you want more of a stiff type of leaf, which can also work, and it's just up to you which type you want to include in this painting. For the second leaf type, I'm actually just going to use the same design as the 3rd flower, but this time I'm just going to use the green instead of adding the blue to the tip of the flowers. And I'm just going to speed through this one a little bit faster because it's basically the same as the 3rd flower. Again, here I'm just picking up any of the greens that I have. It doesn't really matter. For the final composition, you can always mix and match the greens either way. You will notice that when I painted the flower, I painted the dots first, but this time I painted the stems first, and there's really no rule to this, just find whichever is easier for you to paint. So now I'm just going to paint everything here in my sketchbook. Depending on the size that you want to paint, you can also do a double page spread, but I prefer to do just one page of a landscape painting. And here I'm just going to start with the first flower and paint them one by one according to the order of flowers that I've shown you how to paint previously. However, if you want to fill a larger page, like for instance, if you would like to use this to decorate a large letter or something like that, but you don't want to increase the size of each flower, you can also repeat the flowers or alternate them as you please, and also include different colors on top of the ones that I've given to create even more colorful flower field. Here I'm painting the full bushy flowers as how I've drawn them, but you could even make it bushier to cover more space if you would like to. These designs would also look really nice as individual larger paintings in a page if you're looking to fill something like a small sketchbook. There are just so many different options of how you can use these flowers, and I hope you guys would have heaps of fun customizing it for your own needs. For my flowers here, since I didn't have too much space, I did make the stems a little bit more straight compared to how I sketched it out. So it doesn't take too much space horizontally for my page. But notice that even when I'm painting straight down, I still try to break the lines and change the direction ever so slightly so the main stem still doesn't look unnaturally stiff. I'm also leaving out a small bit of space in between the flowers, so there's a break in between the different colors where I'll be painting the leaves in between to create a fuller look. This is up to you though. You can just create connecting bush of flowers if you would like to, but as for me, when I picture wildflowers, there's always a lot of greenery around, which is why I'm going to paint more leaves. So now I think the rest is fairly straightforward. I'm just going to finish painting the 5 flower types. Then I'm going to get back to you again and I'll show you what to do with the leaves. Now that I've filled the space with the flowers, I'm going to start painting the leaves. I'm going to start at the very left and I'm going to alternate between the two leaf types and paint in between those flowers. I'm going to paint the leaves a little bit shorter than the flowers, so the flowers are still the main focus. And if at this point you also have any other ideas of different leaves, you can also incorporate it into your own paintings as well. For the green colors for the leaves, again, I'm just going to take whatever I have mixed on my palette. However, whenever all of the colors are starting to combine together and you only have one shade of green, you can take some of the original colors to adjust to the greens on the palette to make it a bit darker, lighter, or warmer, or even muted. There might be some tighter spaces in your painting like how mine is, and for this it's okay to not paint too many leaves. Sometimes some negative space is also nice to look at. It gives a little bit of break for your eyes. I kind of noticed how I've crowded some of the space, so I'm just giving you a heads up to not get too caught up in each individual element and forget about the spacing. This is one of my weaknesses. I tend to overwork my paintings, but it's always better to be aware of it than not to even notice, even if it's a bit late. After I finish painting all of the leaves, I like to hide little budding flowers around those green areas by just adding touches of colors here and there for a little bit of extra color. And I'm just going to paint dots or markings and not worry too much about the shape of the flower. These are just wildflowers, so they tend to be a bit smaller, and you can also alternate the colors according to your liking. The painting is pretty much done here, but as a final touch-up, I like to add little dots of the same color of the flowers and place them on top of the flower like it's sprinkling and shining on top of each of the wildflowers. This is optional. I mentioned that I have a problem with overworking my work, and I think this is probably just one of them. I tend to not know when to stop, but I didn't really mind it at the end, and it's really up to you and your preference depending on what you're going to use this painting for. So that's pretty much it. This is the finished painting. Feel free to customize it however you would like to. Like usual, all of the list of tools and social media links will be in the description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!